Welcome, brothers and sisters, to our Lenten series entitled Junk in the Yard. We have concluded the reflection on the capital sin of greed, and the next one in order on the list is lust, according to the listing of St. John Caspian and St. Gregory the Great, who put together the list of the 7 capital sins. One of the reasons why the sin of lust follows greed is the fact that both are the manifestations or the displays of the same deeper issue. We may say 2 sides of the same coin, and that is a disordered affection or pursuit of pleasure in one's own life, a continuous need of having more, as we discussed when we talked about the sin of greed. Sébastien Lapègue, who is one of the famous journalists and writers in France, wrote that if there would be a queen vice of the 20th century, it would be connected with greed. However, Archbishop Fulton Sheen attributed the queenship of vices to be lust. He says that lust is the disordered pursuit of pleasure of the flesh. St. Thomas Aquinas, speaking about the sin, says, "It is the greatest pleasure, and this absorbs the mind more than anything else." When we take together the definition given by Thomas Aquinas and Archbishop Fulton Sheen, we understand that there is a problem with the disorder. And human life, at one point or another, is basically circulating around these matters that are so critical to human life, because it has to do with love, with acceptance, with the use of sexuality. And these areas, if wrongly pursued and engaged into, can create a lot of personal problems. Michel Houellebecq, who is a French writer, poet, screenwriter, and also movie maker, in one of his books entitled The Elementary Principles, writes about the sexual revolution of 1968. And he says the following about the outcome of this revolution: "The world of lonely people, interiorly burnt out, totally incapable of true love, nor to build real human relationships. It is the world horribly cold, although there is a lot of sex in it." Would we agree with the author that today's world that is so overly sexualized is so deeply affected by what really is so sacred to human life, which is sexuality? One of the characteristics of the sin of lust is intemperance, which is a lack of moderation or self-restraint when it comes to a consumption of alcoholic beverages, but also when it comes to food. There is a pursuit of pleasure, finding it and trying to compensate for a lack of interior comfort or joy. Everybody's looking for happiness. The quickest way of trying to find it is food or material goods, as we discussed in the episodes about the sin of greed, but also this intemperate attitude. A disordered pursuit of pleasure will make a person find a goal in what he or she can eat or where one's own gratification will come, and will exchange a goal for the means. Just to give an example, food is necessary and eating brings pleasure, but it is not the goal in itself. To stay alive, we need to nourish our human body. Otherwise, we will die. We understand that the goal is to stay alive, and the nutrition is the means to achieve that goal. However, if the means will become the goal, there is a disordered pursuit of what is truly critical and necessary. When human sexuality ends up being disordered, then a person will pursue it as a goal instead of the means. There is a search for maximum pleasure when it comes to this area, without counting the cost and the consequences. It is a very self-centered, very selfish attitude and action that only looks for one's own contentment and gratification. And as I explained in the introduction, the people who are hurt in this area have a major problem in coming out, because the pleasure is short-lived and leaves the soul empty. And in consequence, there is a need for more gratification, more aggressive, more stimulating way of filling up the interior void of one's own heart. This disorder that is rooted in intemperance will bring to all sorts of manipulation and dominance, and also abuse of the other person. When these passions, this disordered horse, as some call it, is not reined, is not properly dominated by our reason, by how we go about our bodily passions. God provides ways of receiving the healing in this area of intemperance, which is the cardinal virtue of temperance, when a person knows the right amount to consume. When it comes to alcohol, as I mentioned at the beginning, that does not become the goal. And now we can speculate and talk a lot where the actual limit is. But for many people, the alcohol turned out into a tragedy, ending up in an addiction. But a person who, thanks to one's own reason, enlightened by faith, certain right approach of dominating one's own passions, is no longer ruled by the external reins, by one's own needs of gratification at any cost, pursuing pleasure to the highest degree, but knows how to put the reins on one's own longings and desires and cravings. That's the cardinal virtue of temperance. This also leads to a deeper self-knowledge and comes out as the fruit of knowing personal weakness and maybe proclivity to be drawn into abuse of different substances. We become wise thanks to the action of God's grace and self-knowledge. As we begin this day, let us reflect and think about the times we said no to our own cravings. We were able to say no to an excessive eating. In this time of Lent, we are called to practice abstinence and moderation. One of the answers that the Church gives us in the season of Lent is fasting. All that is pretty much under the same umbrella of the virtue of temperance. As we are speaking about the capital sin of lust, one of the important ways that the saints teach us how to dominate this vice is through fasting, denying one's own self the food, and that will allow us to turn to the Lord saying, "You are stronger than my passions. Help me, Lord." These are the old monastic suggestions. God bless you as we continue our Lenten series.